Hello, you beautiful people. Today we are here with 5 players that I think you should sell high on. So these are mainly guys whose values I think have increased way beyond what they're going to produce for the rest of the season, whether it be just because of an injury to someone on their team or another reason like that. They're just guys that I think some people might be curious of whether they should keep them and expect this kind of production or whether they should just trade them. And personally, I'm on the side of just trading them. So first up on the list is Kristaps Porzingis. Last 15 days, he's averaging around 47 fantasy points per game. On the season, he's only at 40, and it's fairly evident as to why. If we look at his recent shooting percentage, he's shooting around 61% from the field, whereas on his career, he's only a 45% from the field shooter. So definitely a huge inflation that I would not expect to sustain itself. I would definitely expect that to start coming down to earth very soon, especially with Beal entering the lineup again. I mean, Beal might miss a game or two with I think it was a hamstring or a knee thing or something like that. But for the season, I mean, especially considering Kristaps' injury history, which is something I always take into account with Kristaps. He hasn't played in more than 55 games since 2019. And whenever he sort of has a high streak, I always advocate people sell high on him because you're just kind of playing with a glass cannon. And I think there's more durable players that can provide similar, if not better, value than Kristaps. And I think people kind of get allured into him every year. And then it's just a matter of time before something bad happens. And I mean, you can't predict injuries 100%, but I feel like in cases like Kristaps, I mean, it's a fairly safe bet to just try to get someone who's, historically been a more reliable player. So if we look at the recent trades involving Kristaps on the Yahoo trade market, like I said, this is typically for ESPN leagues, but it does apply for Yahoo leagues as well to a certain degree. And there's nothing like the ESPN trade market that exists right now. ESPN should definitely add that. But anyways, it just gives us an idea of recent trades made involving Kristaps so we can get an idea of his value. So someone traded him for Jalen Brunson. Personally, I'm a big fan of that trade. I would much rather have Brunson on my team. There's another trade here for Bam Adebayo. I think I would rather have Bam on my team than Kristaps. And then there's a trade here for Kristaps for DeJounte Murray, which I think is a huge reach. If you can get DeJounte Murray for him, I mean, it might be a good time to buy low on Murray, but getting him for Kristaps I think is a bit much. But I mean, it remains to be seen. That's just, something you can try. Just ask around in your league, stuff like that. But I do think this is a good time to sell high on Kristaps because I don't think this kind of production out of him is sustainable. So with that being said, we'll just go ahead and move on to the second player on my list. All right, moving on, I think Kevin Porter Jr. is a massive sell-high player right now. Over the last 7 days, he's averaging around 55 fantasy points, which is just ridiculous. But even looking at the last 15 days, he is up to around 38 fantasy points per game. I really don't expect that kind of production to be sustained from Kevin Porter. In my mind, he's sort of around a 35 fantasy point per game best-case scenario, which is what he's averaging on the season. And he's just an incredibly streaky player. He just has stretches where he goes on an absolute tear, puts up 24 points per game, 8 rebounds, 7 assists, and then his turnovers are lower than what they're normally at. But I mean, we're looking at one of the most turnover-prone players in the league. He definitely has nights where he's just not efficient at all from the field, and it's sort of just I really don't know what to do with him. He's just so inconsistent night to night. We saw it last fantasy season as well. He had a 12-game stretch where he just looked unreal, and then he just came crashing back down to earth. I am expecting a similar sort of thing to happen this season, so I think it is a great time to sell high on him, especially when I don't think his value will get any higher than this. So if we look at recent trades involving him, someone traded him 1-for-1 for Zach LaVine. I know there is the injury concern with Zach LaVine, but I think I would rather have him than Kevin Porter Jr. Someone traded him for Rudy Gobert. I think I would take Gobert over Kevin Porter as well. Another trade here for Terry Rozier. I think Terry Rozier is a better fantasy option in my opinion for a points league. Maybe you'll disagree with that, but I just think I would expect better production out of Terry on the whole of the season than I would from Kevin Porter Jr. I know Terry's numbers are a bit low right now. I mean, he hasn't really looked the same since he came back from that ankle sprain, but over the season, I am expecting that to sort of even out, and we'll see his fantasy numbers start to take an increase. So if you can get him for Kevin Porter, I think that's a pretty solid trade. And yeah, that's going to do it for him. There's a few other trades here. I mean, someone involved them with PJ Washington for Anthony Edwards. I don't know if you'd be able to pull that off, but if you could, I think that is a pretty solid package to get Anthony. I mean, he's also, again, sort of a streakier player, but I do trust Edwards' production more than I would trust Porter's, so definitely some trades to consider there, but I do think it's a good time to sell high on him. Next up, we got my favorite player in the league, Kelly Oubre Jr. I mean, very evident sell high as well. Last 15 days, he's up to 36 fantasy points per game. Last 7, up to 43. It is not that kind of production that you're going to be expecting out of Kelly Oubre. I mean, we all know LaMelo's been out. That's been leading to a lot more shot opportunities to be spread around the Hornets. And Kelly Oubre has soaked up a lot of that usage. I mean, he's just been on an absolute tear for his standards anyway. This kind of shooting efficiency isn't sustainable. The scoring numbers aren't sustainable. Again, he's a streakier player, but he's usually typically pretty inefficient. Doesn't really contribute too much in the assist categories or the rebound categories, and both have been a bit more than what you'd expect out of him. So I'm definitely considering him a very easy, very clear sell high player for now. The only problem is you're probably not going to be able to pull off too many 1-for-1 trades involving him because people are sort of more aware. So the only 1-for-1 trade I can see here is for D'Angelo Russell, which, to be fair, I think I would rather have D'Angelo Russell on my team for the duration of the season. I know like right now they are averaging around the same on the season. Kelly Oubre is around 31 and D'Angelo Russell's around 30.5. But if the Hornets are fully healthy, I do think, Russell's a better fantasy option than Oubre. Russell's just had a few games where he's put up like 6 fantasy points, and that's definitely hurt his average, but I'm expecting that to even out, and I do think he's a better fantasy option. But anyways, if you can include him in like a 2-for-1 kind of trade, I think he's the perfect player, because I don't see Kelly Oubre averaging, higher than low 30s in terms of fantasy points per game. And if you throw that along with another piece to make a significant upgrade to your team, I think it's a good way to do it. If we look at some recent trades that have kind of tried to do that, there's one here, Kelly Oubre and Paul George for Michael Porter Jr. and LaMelo. I think that's a pretty solid trade. I mean, I think I'd rather have the LaMelo Porter side of that. So that just kind of gives you an idea. I mean, if you're ever in situations where you're like, damn, I want to upgrade this player and I'm trying to make a trade with this guy, but I need to include a second player on my team to, increase the value. I think Kelly Oubre is a great sort of pairing player to do that with, because I think, his value is like low 30s at best case for fantasy, and right now it's just way elevated, so maybe people will think they're getting a better deal than they actually are. So yeah, I think I would definitely try to take advantage of that and try to dish him off if I could. But yeah, that's really all I have to say about Kelly. Alright, then we got Mikhail Bridges. I mean, last 7 days he's averaging around 46 fantasy points per game, and 45, and then last 15 he's averaging 41. And I mean, Chris Paul's been missing time. We all know Cam Johnson's going to be out for a while, but when these two return to the lineup, and I'm expecting Paul to return way before Cameron Johnson, I think we are going to see Bridges' value sort of start to tank back down to earth. I've said back down to earth so many fucking times. I don't know why I keep repeating that. Apologies. But anyways, yeah, I just don't really think this kind of production is sustainable out of Mikhail Bridges. I mean, if we're looking at his season, he's shooting 44% from 3, and while he is an elite 3-point shooter, 44% does seem a tad bit too high. And then looking at his recent numbers on the season, I mean, we all know he contributes pretty solidly and consistently in the stocks category, but it's mainly the scoring and the rebounds. Those have both seen an increase. He's had a few high assist games here and there. I mean, he just had 9 assists against Golden State, 5 assists against New York, stuff like that. And I mean, on his career, he's only averaging around, 3.5 assists per game, so I'm definitely not expecting a lot of playmaking out of Mikhail. He's just sort of, taking up the brunt of the impact with Chris Paul being out, and then stepping into a more elevated role in the wing depth with Cam Johnson and Jay Crowder being out of the lineup. But I mean, obviously, expect some elevated production out of him for a bit. Depends on the extent of the Paul injury. I don't think Mikhail Bridges is like the necessary benefactor of that, but he's definitely seeing some residual effects, and I would highly recommend selling high on him. So if we go ahead and look at recent trades involving him, they're probably going to be, another guy that maybe you want to include in a 2-for-1. There haven't been too many deals involving him, actually. There's only been 4 trades, and they've all been like 2-for-1s, 2-for-3s, etc., stuff like that. So can't really give you too good of an idea for their value, but to me on the season, I mean, I would treat Mikhail Bridges like around a 35 fantasy point per game average kind of guy. Definitely not the 40 that he's been averaging the last 15, and definitely not the 45 he's had the last 7. So I think anyone that you think is going to average above 35 fantasy points per game, if you want to ask in the Discord, 1-for-1 trade ideas, or maybe in the comments, I can sort of give you some feedback on guys that you're not sure about. But yeah, I do think it's a good time to sell high on him. He is a consistent player. He does play in a lot of games, but I'm just not expecting him to, be around the 40s in terms of fantasy points per game, and that's why I think it's a good time to sell high on him. Alright, so then the last player I'm going to consider a sell high for this week in this video is going to be Harrison Barnes, and obviously this is mainly just due to, Keegan Murray missing some time, but on the last 7 days he's averaging up around 38 fantasy points per game. Obviously that's not the kind of production we're going to see out of Barnes. Last 15 days he's around 32 fantasy points per game. Again, that's way too high. On the season he's only at around 24.5 fantasy points per game, and while he has had a pretty lackluster start, I think it's largely in part due to the increased front court depth that Sacramento has added with Keegan Murray. You got Kevin Huerter in there now, who's absorbing a lot of the minutes, and there's just not as much opportunity for Harrison Barnes as there was last year. So I definitely think it's a good time to sell high on him, just because Keegan Murray is back into the lineup now. They're starting to get fully healthy, and they just look like a better team when he's on the floor. I'm just going to be honest. So if we look at recent trades involving him, I mean, you're not going to be able to get a whole lot for Harrison Barnes. It's not like his value was crazy high, but someone managed to pull off a Harrison Barnes for Trey Jones trade. I would much rather have Trey Jones on my team. There's one here for Kawhi Leonard. I assume that's just a troll. I mean, obviously, if you can get him for Kawhi, then your league's just, fucking stupid. But if you can't do it, hey, why not? And then there's another 2 trades here. One for Klay Thompson. I would rather have Klay on my team, even though he's also not been very good. I think the upside's a lot higher. And then finally, there's a trade for Michael Porter Jr., which is also just insane. But I mean, people are pulling these trades off, so it's not like out of the realm of possibility. Michael Porter Jr. is only averaging around 28 fantasy points per game on the season right now. And I'll definitely make a buy low video later this week, and Michael Porter Jr. will most certainly, he'll pretty much certainly be in it, so stay tuned for that. I'll sort of go in depth on why I think he's a buy low player and stuff like that. But that's going to do it for me today. That's going to wrap up the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you think there's any other sell high players that I missed. If you just want to ask a question, if you think if you want to know whether I think they're a sell high player or not, just let me know in the comments. I'll try to respond. But yeah, as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.